Today, we're diving into a really dramatic chapter from the early days of Medina, the story of the Banu An-Nadeer. And let me tell you, this is so much more than just a historical event. It's a high-stakes story of broken alliances, deep treachery, and a shocking assassination plot that would change everything for the young Muslim community. So let's get right into it. Okay, so to really get what's happening with Banu An-Nadeer, you have to see the bigger picture. This wasn't just some isolated incident that came out of nowhere. As you can see here, it was actually the second of 4 major confrontations that took place in and around Medina. It all started with the Banu Qaynuqa, which then led to our story today with the Banu An-Nadeer, followed by the Banu Qurayza, and it all finally wraps up at Khaibar, which is actually where the exiled leaders of Banu An-Nadeer ended up. So understanding the sequence is absolutely key to feeling the rising tension in the city. So what was the breaking point? What really brought things to a head with the Banu An-Nadeer? Well, it wasn't just one single thing. It was a whole pattern of behavior, a series of actions that completely violated the Charter of Medina. You know, the city's constitution that basically promised everyone would defend each other. For the Muslims, this pattern felt like a deep and dangerous betrayal. Here's a perfect example of that breach of trust. After a raid on Medina, Abu Sufyan, who was the leader of the Quraysh, the main adversaries of the Muslims in Mecca, was given shelter and strategic intelligence by the Banu Nadeer. Now, this was a huge deal. It was a direct violation of their treaty, basically the equivalent of helping a declared enemy of the state right inside your city walls. But it didn't stop there, not even close. During the critical battles of Badr and Uhud, moments where the entire Muslim community's survival was hanging by a thread, the Banu An-Nadeer didn't just refuse to help, as they'd promised. It's reported they actively worked with the Quraysh, allegedly pointing out the city's weakest points to the very people they had sworn an oath to defend against. All of this history of betrayal, it all builds up to one single moment that made conflict absolutely unavoidable. This was the final straw, the point of no return, a direct attempt on the Prophet's life. So picture this. The Prophet goes to the Banu An-Nadeer district on official business. He was there to ask for their help in paying blood money for a victim, which was a shared financial responsibility under their treaty. On the surface, everything seemed fine. They welcomed him, seemed happy to see him, and asked him to sit and wait while they collected the money. But while he was waiting, a terrible plot was being hatched. Their leaders secretly told a man to get on the roof of a nearby house and drop a huge millstone right on top of the Prophet. Let's be clear about what this was. A premeditated plan to assassinate a head of state, a man with whom they had a formal treaty. But the plot never happened. According to Islamic tradition, right at that moment, God revealed the conspiracy to the Prophet through the angel Jibril. Without saying a word to his hosts, without tipping them off to the danger, the Prophet just calmly stood up and started walking back towards the center of Medina, leaving his companions there, who were probably pretty confused. His companions followed him shortly after, and that's when they learned the shocking truth. The assassination had failed, but the attempt itself was an undeniable act of war. It was a clear message that all treaties were now null and void, and that they considered themselves enemies of the entire Muslim community. And this incredible moment of deliverance is actually captured forever in the Quran. This verse you see here was revealed specifically about this event. For the early Muslims, this became this powerful real-life lesson in tawakkul, that core Islamic idea of having complete and total trust in God's plan and protection, especially when you're facing dangers you can't even see. So faced with this ultimate betrayal, what was the response? It wasn't immediate all-out war. Instead, it was a clear, direct ultimatum. They were given a choice, a peaceful path out or war. So the Banu An-Nadeer basically get 2 very different messages. The first is the official ultimatum from the Prophet, delivered by a man they respected: leave Medina in 10 days and you can go in peace. But then a second secret message arrives. This one is from Abdullah ibn Ubay, a powerful figure in Medina who publicly claimed to be Muslim, but was widely seen as the leader of the hypocrites, always working against them behind the scenes. And he promised them help if they decided to fight. Now, the Prophet was very strategic about who he sent with the ultimatum. Muhammad ibn Maslama was from the Aus tribe, who had been allies with the Banu An-Nadeer for generations. So when he shows up, they ask him, "How could you, our old friend, bring us this news?" And his reply, wow, it's powerful. He tells them hearts have changed, and Islam has erased past covenants. basically saying his loyalty was now to a higher principle than old tribal ties. And this is the lie that sealed their fate. Abdullah ibn Ubay's secret message convinced them to reject the peaceful option. He promised 2,000 fighters would march to their aid, telling them to barricade themselves in their forts. Trusting this lie, their leader, Huyai ibn Akhtab, defiantly announced that they would never leave. So they made their choice. They trusted the treacherous promise instead of the clear ultimatum. And that decision led directly to the next, inevitable chapter, the siege of their fortresses and their final exodus from Medina. The 10-day deadline came and went. They didn't leave, so the Muslim army marched. The Banu An-Nadeer locked the gates to their massive fortresses, expecting those 2,000 reinforcements to show up at any minute. Of course, they never did, and a siege began that would last for 15 long nights. To break this stalemate, the Prophet ordered a pretty drastic strategic move: to cut down and burn some of their precious date palm trees. Now, you have to understand, for the Banu An-Nadeer, these groves were their main source of wealth, their pride. Watching them go up in flames just cast terror into their hearts. It completely broke their will to fight. Realizing that no help was coming and their position was hopeless, the Banu An-Nadeer finally surrendered. And the scale of their departure was just immense. It took a massive caravan of 600 camels to carry all of their families and their possessions out of the city. The terms of surrender were actually pretty generous, all things considered. They could leave with their lives, and they could take anything their camels could carry, everything except their weapons. In one last act of defiance, they actually tore down their own houses, loading the doors and the wooden beams onto their camels just so the Muslims couldn't use them. And get this, their departure wasn't some sad, somber procession. No, in a final show of pride and defiance, they had women playing musical instruments and singing at the back of the caravan. This was all for show, a public performance to project an image that they were still wealthy, still in high spirits, and to deny their opponents any sense of victory. This entire saga, from the broken promises to the assassination plot to that final, defiant exit, was so significant that it wasn't just recorded in history books. It was actually enshrined forever within the Quran itself, immortalizing the event and its lessons for all time. In fact, the great scholar and companion of the Prophet, Abdullah ibn Abbas, pointed out that the 59th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Hashr, is so deeply connected to this event that it ought to be called the chapter of Banu An-Nadeer. The whole chapter details their expulsion, it clarifies the rules on the spoils of war, and it totally exposes the true nature of the hypocrites who betrayed everyone. And so this incredibly dramatic chapter from history leaves us with a really complex and timeless question. The story of Banu An-Nadeer is this stark case study in alliances, betrayal, and consequences. And it forces us to ask, when your community's very survival is on the line, how do you walk that fine line between the need for trust and the absolute necessity of vigilance?